I made haste the following morning to be under way, after a night of wakefulness on the weird shore. Before weighing anchor, however, I prepared a cup of warm coffee over a smart wood fire in my great Montevideo stove. In the same fire was cremated the Fuegian spider slain the day before by the little warrior from Boston, which a Scots lady at Cape Town long after named Bruce, upon hearing of its prowess at Echo Mountain. The Spray now reached away for Coffee Island, which I sighted on my birthday, February 20, 1896. There she encountered another gale that brought her in the lee of Great Charles Island for shelter. On a bluff point on Charles were signal fires, and a tribe of savages, mustered here since my first trip through the strait, manned their canoes to put off for the sloop. It was not prudent to come to, the anchorage being within bowshot of the shore, which was thickly wooded. But I made signs that one canoe might come alongside, while the sloop ranged about under sail in the lee of the land. The others I motioned to keep off, and incidentally laid a smart Martini Henry rifle in sight, close at hand on the top of the cabin. In the canoe that came alongside, crying their never-ending begging word Yamaschooner, were 2 squaws and 1 Indian, the hardest specimens of humanity I had ever seen in any of my travels. Yamaschooner was their plaint when they pushed off from the shore, and Yamaschooner it was when they got alongside. The squaws beckoned for food, while the Indian, a black-visaged savage, stood sulkily, as if he took no interest at all in the matter. But on my turning my back for some biscuits and jerked beef for the squaws, the buck sprang on deck and confronted me, saying in Spanish jargon that we had met before. I thought I recognized the tone of his Yamaschooner, and his full beard identified him as the black Pedro, whom, it was true, I had met before. "Where are the rest of the crew?" he asked, as he looked uneasily around, expecting hands, maybe, to come out of the forescuttle and deal him his just deserts for many murders. "About 3 weeks ago," said he, "when you passed up here, I saw 3 men on board. Where are the other 2? I answered him briefly that the same crew was still on board. "But," said he, "I see you are doing all the work," and with a leer he added as he glanced at the mainsail, "Hombre valiente." I explained that I did all the work in the day, while the rest of the crew slept, so that they would be fresh to watch for Indians at night. I was interested in the subtle cunning of this savage, knowing him, as I did, better perhaps than he was aware. Even had I not been advised before I sailed from Sandy Point, I should have measured him for an arch-villain now. Moreover, one of the squaws, with that spark of kindliness which is somehow found in the breast of even the lowest savage, warned me by a sign to be on my guard, or Black Pedro would do me harm. There was no need of the warning, however, for I was on my guard from the first, and at that moment held a smart revolver in my hand, ready for instant service. "When you sailed through here before," he said, "you fired a shot at me," adding with some warmth that it was muy malo. I affected not to understand, and said, "You have lived at Sandy Point, have you not?" He answered frankly, "Yes," and appeared delighted to meet one who had come from the dear old place. "At the mission?" I queried. "Why, yes," he replied, stepping forward as if to embrace an old friend. I motioned him back, for I did not share his flattering humour. "And you know Captain Pedro Samblick?" continued I. "Yes," said the villain, who had killed a kinsman of Samblick. "Yes, indeed, he is a great friend of mine." "I know it," said I. Samblick had told me to shoot him on sight. Pointing to my rifle on the cabin, he wanted to know how many times it fired. "Cuantos?" said he. When I explained to him that that gun kept right on shooting, his jaw fell, and he spoke of getting away. I did not hinder him from going. I gave the squaws biscuit and beef, and one of them gave me several lumps of tallow in exchange, and I think it worth mentioning that she did not offer me the smallest pieces, but with some extra trouble handed me the largest of all the pieces in the canoe. No Christian could have done more. Before pushing off from the sloop, the cunning savage asked for matches, and made as if to reach with the end of his spear the box I was about to give him. But I held it toward him on the muzzle of my rifle, the one that kept on shooting. The chap picked the box off the gun, gingerly enough to be sure, but he jumped when I said "Kiddow," look out, at which the squaws laughed, and seemed not at all displeased. Perhaps the wretch had clubbed them that morning for not gathering mussels enough for his breakfast. There was a good understanding among us all. From Charles Island, the Spray crossed over to Fortescue Bay, where she anchored and spent a comfortable night under the lee of high land, while the wind howled outside. The bay was deserted now. They were Fortescue Indians whom I had seen at the island, and I felt quite sure they could not follow the Spray in the present hard blow. Not to neglect a precaution, however, I sprinkled tacks on deck before I turned in. On the following day, the loneliness of the place was broken by the appearance of a great steamship, making for the anchorage with a lofty bearing. She was no Diego craft. I knew the sheer, the model, and the poise. I threw out my flag, and directly saw the stars and stripes flung to the breeze from the great ship.